We're talking today of engine performance. 1 test 6, engine condition diagnosis and in-vehicle service. From Engine Performance Textbook, chapters 13 and 14. We're going to jump through these things right quick here. Technician A says low oil pressure causes engine wear. Technician B says engine wear can cause low oil pressure. Who's right about that? Who's saying it? Everybody like that answer? Both of them? All right. Okay, how can engine wear cause low oil pressure?
Engine wear?
Somebody tell me how engine wear can cause low oil pressure.
Bearings?
If you got too much clearance where your bearings are worn, it's going to shoot out. Excuse my hiccups, by the way. Got it? So if it's got loose, if it's got a lot of slack there, you remember what I told you? You pull your oil pump off. If you're thinking, or you can actually do it if you by just pulling the oil pressure sending unit out. If you want to do it that way, you got to be able to have your pan off so you can see what's going on more or less, and have. And if you shoot air pressure in there, where the oil gallery is, then you hear it hissing somewhere real loud. Shh, then you know you got something wore out. Cam Barrett will do that and this kind of stuff. So anyway, engine wear can cause low oil pressure, but low oil pressure can cause engine wear. It's sort of a vicious cycle. The following statements are all correct except A. Oil pressure may be tested by removing the oil pressure sending unit and installing a pressure gauge. Can we do that?
Yeah.
Y'all have done that, haven't you? Recommended. Now I'm talking about installing a gauge to read the actual pressure. Is what I was talking about. Recommended oil pressure is 1 psi for every 1,000 RPM.
That's not true.
That's not true. Oil pressure testing should be done at normal operating temperature, and oil pressure reading should be made at idle at 2,500. If it's not at normal operating temperature and the oil is cold and thick, you may have more oil pressure than is accurate when it's warm. Technician A says if the oil pressure warning light is on, the oil pressure should be checked with a manual gauge. That's true because you know if your gauge in your slash sending unit or your wiring something that causes you to have, you don't want to put an engine in there and do a bunch of heavy duty engine work because you had a gauge that was lying to you. That's bad news. So you want to put a gauge you know is right. You basically you want a benchmark or baseline. You want it to work like that. All right. So technician B says a faulty electrical circuit can cause the oil pressure warning light to come on, even when the oil pressure is good, and you know both of those guys are right. Which of the following could result in low engine compression? A. Damaged piston or piston ring, damaged valve, cylinder head gasket. All of these are correct. What if I was checking compression and I found the two cylinders next to one another were both low?
Head gasket.
And how would that be?
Unless it's a companion cylinder.
Blown between them. If it's blown between the two cylinders, and that happens sometimes, the compression just goes back and forth. Hey, Joel. All right. When preparing for a compression test, Technician A disables the ignition system. Technician B only removes the spark plug for the cylinder he's testing. Who's right about that? That's A. But just disabling the ignition system. No, what you need to do,
Remove all spark.
if you're going to compression test, you pull them all out and you hold the gas pedal all the way to the floor. Because you want it to get all the air it can. Now, that's not to say that you're not going to get decent readings without that, because a lot mechanics used to argue about that whenever I'd be working in the field. But you're supposed to pull all the plugs, but most of the time, if you're looking on and you know one cylinder's got a problem, if you take and just check the compression on that one cylinder, and you'll know when it's low, you know. In other words, if you put a gauge in there and it's only reading 10 pounds or 50, you know that ain't right. But if you want to get an accurate compression test, you need to pull all the plugs and you need to put your gas pedal all the way to the floor each time you're spinning it over.
Well, how you gonna spin it over if you disable it?
Disable what?
The ignition system.
The ignition system meaning the spark. You don't want it to start.
No, you don't want it to start, but.
You disable the ignition
Okay,
system.
then I got it wrong. I'm thinking you're talking about.
No, not the starter.
Oh.
Ignition system. Yeah, the ignition system would be just the sparks, you know, the spark coils and all that kind of stuff. Now, what you don't want is you don't want sparks popping around out there with injector spraying and fuel squirting out the hole. Because that thing look like an anti-aircraft gun out there, boom, 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 big balls of fire going up and all that. But anyway, you need to make sure that there's no fuel going in there, which putting the gas pedal all the way to the floor will do that, right?
Yep.
So we're gonna say both of them
in a
right.
perfect world. Well, actually,
A.
what these guys are saying, A is right, is the right answer. But you don't just pull the spark plug for the cylinder you're testing out if you're gonna do it right. How many compression strokes should be used for a compression test?
I'd say that.
At least 4, I like 6. Puff, 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 puff. This says 4, I like 6. When performing a cylinder leakage test, the following statements are correct except what? Now, you have a cylinder leakage test. What are the preconditions for a cylinder leakage test?
Top dead center.
Huh? Top dead center of compression.
Correct.
You're right about that. I told this story one time about how I had a car in here, that was a Honda car that had a bad engine in it, a little 1.5.
D is wrong.
And we did a compression test on it. It sounded normal spinning over. We did a compression test on it. Number 4 didn't have any compression at all. We did cylinder leakage on that cylinder and had no cylinder leakage either.
That's weird.
So how is it possible for a cylinder to not have any cylinder leakage but no compression either? You gonna slap yourself?
Compression.
No compression at all, but no cylinder leakage either.
From what he did this morning,
No, cylinder leakage is whenever you're gonna take that cylinder leakage tester in there that's got the 2
Yeah.
gauges on it. You know, you've used it. You put it on top dead center for that cylinder, and you put your cylinder leakage tester in there, and you put that, air pressure in there, and you're gonna be able to, you're supposed to listen to the exhaust and the crankcase and the intake and everywhere to see where that pressure's going. Maybe, see if there's bubbles coming up in the cooling system and all that.
Was the crank moved at all?
It would spin. Whoa, 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 whoa,
For the
whoa.
2 tests.
When we were doing our test, we had good compression on 3 cylinders, but one cylinder had no compression, but no cylinder leakage either when we did cylinder leakage test. The piston wasn't moving
Ah.
because the guy had been tacking it up so much, it threw a rod, but there was so much momentum, it broke the rod off and it knocked a hole in the block and got rid of the rod. And the piston was at the bottom of his board, just kind of sitting there. And so the crankshaft was kind of going past it. It was really interesting. It was odd that you couldn't tell that it didn't have compression from the sound of it, but you couldn't. Air heard escaping through the tailpipe may indicate a defective exhaust valve. Shop air should be applied through a spark plug hole. Bubbles in the coolant may indicate a defective head gasket. Shop air should be applied to the dipstick
I
tube.
don't believe D is
Not
right.
the dipstick.
D is not right. Shop air can be applied to the not shop air, but regulate pressure. You can apply regulated air pressure to the dipstick tube, about 15 pounds, stop up your PCV and your crankcase vent, and you can find an oil leak that way. But don't put but about 15 pounds of pressure on it. And when you spray that, you spray soapy bubbles on there, you can see oil leaks at the oil pan and all that. A pressure leak won't show up there, but another one will. So if you're looking for an oil leak, it's pretty handy to do that. But you need something to put on there and adapt down and get a 15-pound pressure. 10 pounds would be safer probably. But we used to do that at Ford Place. We'd actually, pressure up a crankcase and look for oil leaks that way. In fact, you find them that way too. While performing a cylinder leakage test, the technician says a 20% leakage is acceptable. Technician B says the cylinder will show too much leakage if the piston is not at TDC on its compression stroke.
Neither.
Both of them.
Both those guys are right. The problem with that is you're going to have open valves, right?
Yep.
You don't want open valves. You remember that one that y'all did on the white F-150? Remember that one? The one that you wound up putting the motor in? Actually, Webb and Kelly did that one. We did a cylinder leakage test, and it had lots of cylinder leakage. I mean, lots of it. It had about 70 pounds of compression. And what we did was we took the smoke machine, and we pumped smoke into that hole. And smoke came out the intake. What did that tell us? Intake valve. We decided to put an engine in it because by the time you buy them timing chains, pull the heads off, have them reworked and all that, you're going to be spending $700-800. So we just got a motor. And Willie had to change it twice because the first one wasn't no good. All right. Number 9, the cylinder power balance test is performed. Cylinders 1, 2, and 3 all drop at 175 RPM when disable the scan tool. Cylinder 4, some scan tools let you do that. Cylinder 4 drops 50 RPM when disabled. All of them our statement are correct, except A. Cylinder 4 is much weaker than 1, 2, and 3. Cylinder 4 is stronger than 1, 2, and 3. Test could be conducted by grounding the plug wire for each cylinder, which I do that with a test light. And there may be a mechanical problem with cylinder number 4.
B.
What do you think?
B.
What do you, let's see, cylinder 1, 2, and 3 drop 175. Cylinder 4 drops 50 when disabled.
It must be
It-
stronger than
That is not, That is not, wait a minute. Cylinder 4 is stronger? But it drops less? Seems to me like the stronger cylinder would drop more, wouldn't it? Because it's carrying more of its share,
Well,
it's
says-
doing
it says
more.
The following statements are all correct except.
Oh, I'm sorry. Duh, I missed that except. I hate those questions. ASC tests have those on them too. Technician A says removing the plug wire from a spark plug while the engine is running could damage ignition system components.
Yes.
It can, because if that spark's looking for wherever it can go, and it will go shoot back through that module and mess it up. It can. Technician B says grounding a spark plug wire while the engine is running could damage ignition system components.
Wrong.
That's A. If you ground it, you're providing a path to ground that's easier. You're not going to hurt anything that way. Now you may hurt yourself if you use yourself to ground it. You know what you can do is have one hand behind you and not lean on the car. You can get one of those straps that goes around your wrist that has a ground wire on it. Ground that while you're using your pliers to pull the plug wire off. Of course, you use plastic pliers for that. When you pull that thing off, if it jumps and hits your hand and it doesn't run through your whole body, it don't hurt that bad. So I would lay my hand on something and pull it off. And if it bites you, it just gets up, just pops that one time. Normal engine vacuum at idle is what? No, wait a minute, excuse me. Which is not a step in performing the crank and vacuum test. Let's see, block the throttle wide open. A. You cannot get vacuum if the throttle's open. You gotta have the throttle closed. Normal engine vacuum at idle is what?
3 to 6.
17 to 21.
That would have been my third guess.
Yes, I'm sure. Technician A says a low but steady idle vacuum indicates a sticking valve. That is not true. Not low and steady. Technician B says a fluctuating vacuum gauge indicates incorrect ignition timing. D, neither technician. If you got a sticking valve or a valve that's open or a valve that's burned, doesn't matter if it's intake or exhaust, you're going to see the vacuum gauge go boop, 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 boop. It's going to bounce with the miss. Got me? Doesn't matter which valve it is. It can be the intake valve. Why, if the exhaust valve is burned, would it create a pressure fluctuation in the intake? Got any idea?
Because it's not being able to compress.
No.
It's not escaping.
Want to be sucking air in the tailpipe?
What did he say?
Sucking air into the tailpipe.
Yeah, from the tailpipe. What happens is if the exhaust valve is burned, the intake valve opens, the piston's traveling down, it ordinarily is going to pull air in through the intake, right? But if it's able to pull air from that cylinder in from the exhaust, then the intake will also have a fluctuation. So it doesn't always mean you got an intake valve
So what, is that what's going on with the exhaust? Is it not?
burned. The valve's burned.
It's not. No, what's happening to when is it letting the air out or?
Yeah, there's letting air come in. When the piston goes down, air will come in from the exhaust.
From the intake.
Instead of it's supposed to seal, and air's only supposed to come in through the intake. But if that exhaust has got a hole there where it's burned the valve, it's going to be pulling air in from everywhere.
Oh, okay.
And so anywhere it can, it's going to pull it in. All right, and also you got pressure from the other cylinders pushing on it. See. All right, let me see. Where are we at here?
14.
14. Which of the following is not a cause of high exhaust back pressure? Vacuum leak, restricted exhaust pipe, restricted muffler, restricted catalytic converter.
Vacuum leak.
Vacuum leak cannot cause high exhaust back pressure typically. I mean, I'm sure somebody can come up with some scenario. But high exhaust back pressure, I've run into that more than a few times. I told you about that story when I told Donnie to take 3 of the spark plugs out on one that wouldn't start and it fired up. It's because the exhaust was completely stopped up. Exhaust back pressure of an engine running at idle should be what? You're measuring it less than 1.5. You can take an oxygen sensor out. They make fittings for that, and I got a gauge for it. You screw a fitting in where the oxygen sensor is, put a hose on it between the engine and the catalytic converter. It ought not to read more than about 1.5 psi. I posted, you see that picture I posted on my technical writer page of Jesse James Duke holding that gauge up there when we were checking exhaust back pressure? On that particular one, we drilled a little 1/8 hole right in front of the catalyst, and we put a hose against it, and that thing pegged that gauge out, just pegged it completely. But it passed the temperature gun test. Shoot it in front of the catalytic converter, it was reading about 200 degrees. Shoot it behind the catalytic converter, it's reading about 400. That's the way it's supposed to be. If it's reading 400 in front and 200 behind, in other words, if it's hotter in front of the catalyst than it is behind, the catalyst is plugged. That's not always true. Just because it passed that test doesn't mean you don't have exhaust restriction. Because on that particular one, it passed that test, but it failed exhaust back pressure test. That's the best test. If you put your vacuum gauge on the manifold and you hold it up about 2,500 and the vacuum goes down and stays down, that's another indication that your exhaust is topped up. And it'll kick your fanny if you ain't careful. Those trucks like yours with throttle body injection, though, if the fuel filter gets clogged on that thing, you'll swear somebody's put a potato in your exhaust pipe. It'll go whoa, 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 if it's got low fuel pressure because of a plugged fuel filter on those throttle body injected Chevrolets. That smacked me around first time I ran into that on one of them. All right. You'd swear the exhaust was plugged. I mean, it just feels like it, you know. Okay. Let's see. Where are we at?
16.
Exhaust back pressure of an engine running at idle should be what? No, we got that already. 16. Torque specification for mini plastic intake manifold are in what unit?
Pound inches.
Is that right, guys? You like that? Pound inches works for me. When replacing a timing belt, listen to this, Lundy. Many experts and vehicle manufacturers recommend that what other parts be replaced. Excuse me.
Everything, my friend.
Yeah, all of the above. Just put it all on there. Hybrid electric vehicles usually require special engine oil of what viscosity?
Is it 540 or is it 0?
0.20.
Huh?
0.20.
Listen to old Garrett over there. He's right. 0.20 is right. But did you know 0.20 is thicker than 5W? You know, what's W stand for?
Winter.
Yeah, most people think it's weight. Technician A says a steel gasket scraper on aluminum engine parts. Is that good?
No.
Technician, well, who in here can say, I've never used a steel gasket scraper on aluminum engine parts? You lie, you lie, you lie and your feet stink. Everybody, if you use if you've got a gasket you want to scrape off, you're going to use whatever's at hand. You're not supposed to, you ain't supposed to gouge it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
All right. Technician A uses a steel gasket scraper. No. Technician B uses a plastic or wood scraper on aluminum engine parts. If I've got a plastic or a wood scraper and it ain't getting the job done, the steel's coming out. I mean, let's get a razor blade, man. Let's be careful, but let's get this off there. Or maybe a white bristle disc or something, you know, please. All right. You know, you'd be a real bozo there. All right. 20. An intake manifold gasket's been replaced due to a vacuum leak. Which of the following steps uses a scan tool to complete the job? Idle relearn. There you go. A vehicle is set at P0172, indicating a lean exhaust and a vacuum leak is suspected. It can be diagnosed by introducing what around the intake manifold gasket? Propane. Put a little propane around there. Now they're saying that's not really a good idea. I certainly wouldn't put any rock salt around there, or sprayed gasoline or anything like that. Some engines equipped with a timing belt also may drive the what?
Water pump.
Water pump, yeah, sometimes. You don't see a timing belt driving power steering, AC compressor, or alternator. Hybrid electric vehicle has a feature that could allow the engine to start and run without warning. This feature is called what?
Idle stop.
Battery safe.
Anybody know?
Also,
Idle stop.
Why you do that?
I rode in a hybrid the other day in Troy. Every time we hit a red light, it would just shut off.
What now? Oh, yeah.
I rode in a hybrid in Troy the other day, and it would just stop.
Well, yeah, they don't want to, it's kind of like when I was telling you shut the injectors off when you're letting off. If it doesn't need to run, you don't let it run. If you drive a hybrid, they're kind of peculiar until you get used to them. So a lot of times you take off and it's like a golf cart, it's not making any sound, and it's this strange, Technician A says, some of the wiring under the hood of a late model vehicle has bright orange, encased in a bright orange covering. What does that mean?
High voltage.
High voltage. Technician A says high voltage lineman gloves are supposed to be used when servicing the high voltage system on a hybrid electric vehicles. Technician B says do remove the ignition key before service.
Both of them.
Right about that, both of them guys. If you happen to have that on some of these vehicles, on some of the hybrid vehicles, if you have the fob close enough to the vehicle, it will crank up while you got the oil drain out if the state of charge and battery gets low enough. That's nasty. So you need to have that thing 30 feet or farther from the vehicle. You know what I mean?
Put it in the other shop. Oh, yeah.
Well, you need to be totally familiar with the way the thing works too, and all that. So, you know, just don't get blindsided by that. Here's something else that's oddball about a hybrid. The brake pads on the rear of a hybrid typically wear out before the ones on the front.
Regenerative braking.
It's got regenerative braking, and the front ones don't do as much work as the back ones do. On the Ford Escape, there is a particular way you're supposed to disable the hybrid system so that it doesn't check the brake pressure by itself while you're servicing the brakes. Because if you have the brakes calipers off and it decides that it's going to check something, it may pump that brake system up and blow those calipers. I mean, so be careful about that. Make sure you know it. All right. Now, before everybody goes to sleep on me in here, I'm going to try to read the rest of this. When changing a timing belt, what else you need to change?
That's
Crankshaft
crank
seal. Crank seal's a good idea to change, you know, a lot of times we don't do that. What can be used to detect a vacuum leak in intake manifold gasket?
Wait a minute, that's water.
Propane.
What do you use to-
Propane.
I would put water on there.
That's what I put.
Intake manifold gasket. What else can we use, Joe?
Smoke test.
Let's smoke test it. We love our smoke test, man. If you ain't had a smoke tester, you're hurting. When torquing intake manifold bolts, what's the proper sequence?
Whatever the manual says.
Center to the outside ends. I'll tell you something else. There are some of them, like these aluminum intakes on V6 engines, like some of your wider V6 engines. If you don't detorque those things in the right order, that manifold can warp and you won't even be able to get it off the engine.
I mean, did you say come from the outside in?
Yeah.
Yeah, from the center to the outer ends. Start in the middle, go out. That's torquing. Now, a lot of people don't pay any attention to that, and you may get by with it for a long time. Just it's always good to follow what the book says. Before removing a timing belt, what should you do? If it's in time to start with, what should you do?
If it's
Align the time.
Align the timing marks. Now, you also need to know if it's an interference engine. If it's an interference engine, you're going to be working with a camshaft. You need to put the crankshaft about 90 degrees, or about 90 degrees out of top dead center, because that'll pull the pistons down, so that the valves can operate independently of if you're having to turn the camshaft with it. If it's an interference engine, what's the proper tool used to measure valve clearances?
Feeler gauge.
Yeah.
You skip 29.
Which one I skip? Before removing a timing belt, you should align the timing marks. That was 29, wasn't it?
Oh, I didn't mark it. I thought I marked it.
Second reading, amateur. That's it, guys. We're ready to go.